And welcome everyone. Just give us one quick moment while we pull together our cameras. I just want to say thank you to everyone who's joining us today. Thank you so much for tuning in for this week's episode of Cooking Connected. So if this is your first time with us, welcome. And for all of you guys returning, welcome still. We're excited to be here with you guys today. And excited to go through this really awesome recipe that we have Chef Julia to demonstrate for us. My name is Sajwa, and I am one of the Cooking Matters program coordinators. And I'm also here today with my coworker, Jordan.
Hi.
And with our lovely volunteer, Julia. So both Jordan and I, again, like I mentioned, we work with Cooking Matters Minnesota, and that's also with the University of Minnesota Extension. And then again, we have our volunteer, Julia. Normal Cooking Matters class is a 6-week nutrition-based cooking class. And usually we meet once a week for 2 hours. We'll have a nutrition educator and a chef who work together with a recipe, and the chef will do a demonstration. We learn some nutrition that goes along with that recipe, and then we get to cook the recipe together. So it's a really fun class, and they're really enjoyable to be a part of. For today's episode, our chef will be Julia and Jordan will be the educator, and we're gonna kind of follow that same format that I mentioned earlier. So like every week, we do have a survey that we want to really quickly ask you guys to take. Thank you so much to all of you who have been taking our surveys. It really helps us continue this kind of work, and the constructive criticism helps us make our work better. So today's survey code for this week's episode of Cooking Connected is going to be E097930. And again, that's going to be our program code for this week's episode of Cooking Connected. I'll be sure to link the survey in the description box of this video, as well as in the live chat, so you guys can check that out. And with that, I am going to go ahead and pass this over to Jordan and Julia.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode. As Sajwa mentioned, today we are going to be making a healthy apple crisp. We just want to quickly thank Ambitious Kitchen, Monique with Ambitious Kitchen, for this recipe. So we do have those links in our description box. So thank you, Monique, for this amazing recipe. With that, we can go ahead and get started. Welcome, Julia. Have you made this recipe before?
Have, and it's a really good recipe. And with this, the healthy is, I'm going to say healthier. Yeah. There's still a lot of sugar in it, but sometimes you just need a treat. So
that's right. And we'll talk a little bit more. This recipe,
it's just lower in the sugar. We've got some whole grains in there. And then I'm going to leave the apple peels on too, which is another way that we boost the health of this. So I'm going to do this here. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to do is start on my apples. No, first thing I'm going to do is wash my hands. And I already did that. 20 seconds washing your hands, super important, in between the fingers, around the thumbs, everywhere like that. So I did do that already. I cleaned my workspace. And now, as you can see, I've got everything ready. So this is my mise en place. So this way I don't have to dart around the kitchen and try and grab things, realize that I'm out of something halfway through the recipe. So everything is right here and ready to go. So with that, I'm going to start on my apples. So I've got orchard apples here that I just got at a local orchard. They're called Wealthy is the kind that they are. And they're pretty tart, so they are going to work perfectly in this to kind of balance some of that sugar that we've got in there. The recipe calls for Honey Crisp or Granny Smith apples, but again, anything that you've got on hand. Apples from the orchard are really a cheap way to get some good apples, so that's what I did with these.
Absolutely, and apples right now are in season, so getting local apples, support local farmers is really great. So part of Julia's mise en place here is actually to wash her apples as well. Which I'm sure she's already done. So don't forget that step if you are. Yeah. So don't forget that step if you are using fresh apples. So looks like we got it.
All right. So for this to get started, I'm holding my knife in a certain way. Let's see, from this one. So the way I like to hold my knife is to pinch the blade with my forefinger and thumb and then wrap my fingers around the handle of the knife. That just gives you a lot more control so your knife isn't flailing around everywhere. I've seen people hold knives more like this, and that is just a recipe for cutting a finger off. So I stay away from doing it like that.
Yeah.
And then as you can see here, I've got a method for cutting the core out of my apples. I don't have a corer, so this is how I do it. I'm just going to show you again on this one. So I always use my claw hand to get my fingers out of the way because I don't want to be cutting off any fingers or anything like that. So with this, I'm just going to put my apple down, make sure it's kind of stable, and then cut down one side next to the core. So that gives us this little piece there. Then what I'm going to do is flip it to the cut side, so then it's really stable, not going to roll around on us at all. And do another cut right down next to the core. Same thing for the third side, and then the last side, just right like that. And that gets out all the core, all the seeds, so you don't have to worry about that. And it's nice and safe to always have it on that flat. So for this, the recipe calls for slices of apple. I like it to be a little bit more of a chunk. So what I'm going to do is cut across, still pretty thin. I'm doing about 1/8 of an inch. See if you can see that thickness there. But then after I do this, I'm just going to go turn the pile and do a cut across too, just so that it's a little bit more of a chunk than a slice. If you want to do the slice, that's completely fine. It's just personal preference.
So Julia, with this, is it still important to cut all of your apple slices kind of the same so then they cook about the same?
Absolutely. It's definitely important to try and keep them consistent. Otherwise, you're going to get some chunks of apple that are totally crunchy and raw, and then some chunks that are going to pretty much just dissolve.
Yeah.
Become applesauce.
All right. Well, it looks like Julia has a few apples to cut up there. So while she's doing that, we're just going to quickly go over a little bit of nutrition. So we are making this beautiful sweet treat today. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about portion sizes. This is a healthier sweet treat. I think it is personally really important to still eat the foods that we love. So still eating these sweet treats, but keeping in mind moderation is still really important. So, it's really just remembering that, not to overdo it. So portion control is a way that we can make sure that we don't overdo it on the foods that we do love. So thinking about, we have gone over this before, our nutrition facts. So I just have a little nutrition facts label right over here. Nutrition facts are really important. They do tell you a serving size for the food. And that is actually located, let's see here, right up here. So you can find the serving size of your food. And a serving size tells you the portion that you can eat for all of these different items down here. So for this, it's 1 1/4 cup of this particular food, and you would be consuming 220 calories. So keeping in mind, that's for all of these things. So you're also getting 20% of your vitamin A when you eat 1 1/4 cup. But let's say you doubled that and you ate 2.5 cups instead of 1 1/4. You would still have to double all of these down here. So instead of eating 220 calories, I actually ate 440 because I doubled the serving size. So serving size is a really important thing to look at, and something I'd like you all to consider looking at, especially like when we're thinking about our favorite snacks. So I've got a couple examples here. I love pretzels, and I don't know if any of you have ever done this, but sometimes when you grab that fresh bag of chips or pretzels or whatever you like to snack on, and you go and sit in front of the TV, you open the bag, and then you look down later on and you realize that half the bag is gone. So it's really important to remember our portion sizes because, we need to know how much we're eating. So there's a few things we can do. Looking at our portion sizes for the pretzels that I love, this is 1 portion of pretzels here. So this is 50 pretzels. And I just want you all to see what this looks like in a bowl here. It does not look like very much. You may eat a little more than that, but just keeping in mind that this is one portion of pretzels, and this is another portion here. So we'll just see what 2 portions looks like real quick. And that fills us our bowl up a little bit more. But it's always really important to remember our portion sizes. I'm just going to quickly give you a few tips and tricks before Julia gets done here on how you can watch your portion sizes the easy way, because sometimes it can be really difficult. You can portion out your snacks like I did here. I like to portion out like my chips and stuff. So when I get home from the grocery store, I'll just quickly portion them out in these bags. They do have these lovely reusable bags now. I save my bags and just reuse those bags for my snacks. Another thing you could do is instead don't take the whole bag with you when you're snacking. So I really lean into my laziness and I like to pour it in a bowl. And then I'll actually put the bag away. And if I want more, then I have to go get it. Sometimes I'm not willing to do that, so I will grab something more convenient. And a lot of times, if I have healthy food prepped, I'll gravitate towards that because it's more convenient. So you can actually put your unhealthier choices maybe on a higher shelf or in the back of the cabinet. Might be a good option for you, so then it's not so convenient. Some other things we can do is turn off the distractions. Sometimes when we're sitting in front of the TV, we don't even always realize how much we're eating. So just thinking about our food and being mindful of that. Let's make sure I got everything else before we get started with Julia one more time. One other thing I did want to mention is also like portioning out meals. So if we have leftovers, like a big casserole, you can portion that out. You could either cut it up into portions in the pan, or I like to take it one step further and actually portion it out into Tupperware container. That way, when I am ready for work, I just have one portion ready to grab for lunch the next day. So looks like Julia's got all of her apples cut up there. So I'll turn it back over to Julia.
Perfect. So I did get all of them cut up. I don't know if anybody noticed on one of them, I got a little bit of the core in my slice, so I just went and cut that off. Some people don't mind having a little bit of that middle part, but that's one thing that I really want to avoid in my baked goods. So this is my bowl of apples. I did 5. The recipe calls for 5 to 6. So just either one of those. If your apples are a little bit smaller, maybe go with 6. Mine were an average size, so I just did the 5. So now I'm going to add the rest of the ingredients for my filling. And the first thing is going to be maple syrup. And so this is pure real maple syrup. This is not pancake syrup. It's not, Mrs. Butterworth's or anything like that. This is 100% real maple syrup. And that's really important distinction to get right when you're doing a recipe like this, because that is just, we're trying to make it healthier. And that's just a whole bunch of processed sugar. It's mostly corn syrup. Some of them that you can get actually have a ton of different kinds of artificial sweeteners in them, which not everybody really loves. So you gotta make sure it's the real maple syrup in that.
Sorry, Julia. I just have a quick question for you. Yeah. Sometimes maple syrup can be kind of expensive. Do you have any suggestions for any substitutes?
Definitely. So you could use agave syrup. I know some people, that's getting kind of trendier, so some people have access to that now. Honey would be good. I would just use a little bit less honey. This recipe calls for 1/3 of a cup, so of honey, maybe do 1/4 of a cup. And then if all else fails, throw some regular sugar in there instead.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. So that's that. This is a teaspoon of vanilla extract, just for kind of that warm baked goods flavor. And then this, I've got cinnamon and nutmeg in there. And I really love nutmeg, so it just calls for a pinch, but I did a little bit more than that because I'm a big fan of nutmeg. So you can do whatever you like. And if you really like cloves or allspice, throw some of those in, anything like that. So I'm just gonna toss this up. I'm making sure that I'm getting all of the little clumps. So like this chunk, there's 3 slices all stuck together here. So I'm just gonna make sure to break those up and get some of these other ingredients on all of the surfaces of the apples.
Perfect. It's a very fall recipe. I love it.
All right, so that's that. I'm gonna set this aside for a second while I work on my topping. So for this, I've got all these ingredients over here. Again, I set them up already. So let's see. Yeah, you guys should be able to see most of those now. So with this, we're using 2 different kinds of whole grains in this. One of them is whole wheat flour, and that is just like it sounds. It's the whole kernel of wheat just ground up, and that gives you a lot more nutrients than the refined flour, which is just the basic white flour. And so we really want to try to incorporate whole grains into our diet to get a whole bunch more goodness out of our food. And then this is oatmeal. So it's just regular I use old-fashioned oats because that's just what I have on hand. If you just have the instant, that'll work too. They're pretty much just cut smaller, but it's the same stuff. And these are whole grains as well. So I'm gonna get those mixed up. I have half a cup of pecans here. You don't have to use pecans. If you prefer walnuts, something like that, you can use those instead. I know my sister is allergic to nuts, so if I was making this for her, I would just leave it out. You don't really need to replace that with anything. So do that. Then I've got spices here. This is just cinnamon and salt. And salt is really important to include in even baked goods. I know some people think that salt is only for savory stuff. It's weird to put it in cookies or whatever, but it's a little salt in everything is really beneficial, I think. It just brings out the flavors a whole lot more. So in that case, you wouldn't even need to use as much sugar or anything like that because you'll be able to taste everything more.
So Julia, we do have a question. Could you use any other types of fruit in this, or is there any suggestions that you have for that?
Well, different types of apples, certainly whatever your favorite kind of apple is. I would kind of stay away from something that's really sweet, like Red Delicious or anything like that. Probably is going to just turn into mush. And if that's what you like, then go for it. Other fruit, I think, you could do something with berries, kind of do more of a spring theme. So mixed berries would be good with this. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear my cat playing in the background. Or pears. If you were going to use pears, I would maybe go with the ones that are not quite 100% ripe yet. But I think those would be pretty great. Did you have any other ideas, Jordan?
No, that kind of covers it. I didn't even think of those. I was trying to think of other ones. The berries does sound delicious. I would totally try the berries with that. Absolutely.
Yeah, and with that, I would definitely add less of the sweetener to the filling because berries are so much sweeter to begin with.
Absolutely.
All right, so next I have dark brown sugar here. So dark brown sugar is just the same thing as light brown sugar, except there's more molasses in it. So it gives it a richer flavor. And then also another cool thing is you get more iron and magnesium from the extra molasses. So this is 1/3 cup, and I packed it into the measuring cup. That's the proper way to measure brown sugar. If you ever have a recipe that calls for brown sugar, they're assuming that you're going to pack it into the cup. So you can see in mine, even it still was holding the shape of the measuring cup when I was going. So I'm just going to give that a nice toss, kind of get everything incorporated.
So
and then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut in the butter. So you can see here I've got butter in, I cut it up into little chunks. So that's going to help it incorporate a lot more easily. We're trying to keep some bigger chunks of butter, some smaller chunks of butter. And that's just to keep the texture a little bit varied throughout the topping. So, and this is cold butter. I know sometimes recipes call for room temperature butter, but this we want to stay cold. So I just pulled this out of the fridge. So I'm just going to add that. And then this part, you can do this with 2 knives crisscrossing. You can use a pastry cutter if you have one. I prefer to use my hands. So what I'm going to do with this is just give it a little bit of a toss, kind of get the chunks of butter coated. And then I'm actually going to go in with my hands and kind of separate those chunks of butter. So I am going to wash my hands again, even though I just did. I think for something like this, when my hands are actually going to be in the mixture, I'm just going to do it again just because I feel like it. So
yeah, that is absolutely great. Thank you. So I just did want to mention as well, this is a really great sweet treat, but maybe perhaps you wanted to make something similar but not baked. If you wanted a non-baked option, they do have options out there for this. If you perhaps didn't have access to a stove right away or something like that, you could actually use like an apple pie filling that does have a lot of sweet, like a lot of sugar in it, but you could use that for a sweet treat and add some oats to it. And that would kind of be like a non-baked option if you were interested in doing something like that. All right. So Julia, I did have a question for you. Would you suggest always buying dark brown sugar, or would you buy light brown sugar for some instances?
usually I use light brown sugar. Some things are going to be a lot better with the deep flavor of the dark brown sugar, like this topping. You just get more flavor bang for your buck with that. But in something like chocolate chip cookies, I don't want that to be the predominant flavor. So I use light brown sugar for that kind of thing. That being said, if you really love the taste of molasses and you really love the rich flavor of dark brown sugar, then by all means try that in your cookies.
Yeah. All right. So it looks like we got a couple of questions from our viewers. What does the butter do in this recipe? I'm nervous about adding too many saturated fats in my diet.
Sure, and that's reasonable. Saturated fat is something that we want to try and keep on the lower side for sure. And that is, again, any kind of solid fat. So what this does is really pull the topping together. I mean, imagine if you just sprinkled the dry mixture on top of the apples, it would still be dry when you took it out of the oven. So for this recipe, I'm using a 1/4 cup of butter, and this makes 9 servings. So when you divvy it up like that, it's really not going to be much per serving. But if you don't want to use, well, first of all, if you don't want to use an animal fat, you can use coconut oil, but that does still have saturated fat in it. So if you wanted to do something like that without the saturated fat, you could try using a neutral plant oil like a soybean or corn oil or something like that.
Okay.
I am not going to guarantee that the results are still going to be that crumbliness that you're used to.
Yeah.
Just because of the way that we're doing this, there are some chunks that have bigger chunks of butter and some that have smaller pieces of butter, and that just really adds to the texture of the topping.
Sure. Another question here. Someone asked, is molasses healthy?
You know, it's not that bad. I'm not going to tell you to drink it as an elixir or anything. But like I said, there's iron in it and magnesium. I don't use it as much as I probably could. It does have, like I said, that really deep flavor. So I have a recipe for chocolate cake with a little bit of molasses in it, and that is really good. I should make that again, actually.
Yeah. Absolutely. Anytime for chocolate cake. Yum. That
Sure.
sounds great. All right. It looks.
All right. So this is looking pretty good. You can tell it's crumbly. It kind of falls. Oh, you can't see it from that angle. My hand's in the way. And then I do have some chunks of butter that are a little bit bigger. A lot of them are smaller. It kind of makes it like wet sand a little bit. So you should be able to grab a chunk and have it hold its shape. For the most part, that's what we're looking for with this. So now I'm going to wash my hands again.
Always a good idea to wash your hands. So don't be afraid to do that in the kitchen when you're making this recipe. All right. So we do actually have nutrition facts. So for this recipe, so if you did go to ambitiouskitchen.com and scrolled all the way down pretty close to the bottom, they do have nutrition facts for you. As Julia had mentioned, this does serve 9. So there are 9 servings in here. So maybe if you wanted to portion this out for later to think about portion control, you could cut your pan into 9 different servings and maybe take it one step further and portion it out into Tupperware containers. But yes, it's always a good idea to remember to try to look at your nutrition facts if they're available for you.
All right, so that's it for kind of our preparation. Now I'm just going to put it all in the pan. This is an 8x8 pan that I have. You could also use a 9x9 if that's all you have. It'll just obviously be a little bit thinner. But this is the kind that I have. I went ahead and greased it. I just used spray, but you can definitely use butter if you want to. You know, you've got it out anyway for the topping. So I'm just going to give this a little toss again. Some of the syrup and some of the juices from the apples have kind of concentrated at the bottom of the bowl, so I'm just going to throw those around a little bit. Oh, you know what? I almost forgot. They want us to put a little bit of the topping mixed in with this to thicken it up. So this recipe says to add 1/3 of the filling, which I'm definitely just going to guess. It doesn't need to be perfect, but that'll help thicken the filling so it doesn't have just that liquid chilling at the bottom. The oats and also the flour will help to do that. Glad I remember that. This is why you should always double check your recipe.
That's right. It looks like we got another question from our viewer. Could you buy light brown sugar and just add molasses to make the dark brown sugar?
Actually, yes. And if you run out of brown sugar at all, you can use white sugar and mix it with molasses to make brown sugar. So I don't know the amounts off the top of my head, but you know, that's something that you could definitely look up online. But yeah, that does work.
Perfect.
Okay, so I've got this in here. I'm just going to spread it out kind of into an even layer, because again, that's going to help it cook evenly and make sure that nothing turns into applesauce and nothing's still crunchy. So that's that. And then I'm just going to sprinkle the topping all over the top of it. And don't forget about the edges, because a lot of times, you know, when you have desserts like this, everything is kind of piled in the middle. So I like to actually go around the edges first to make sure that I get them all, and then I'll go through and fill in the parts in the middle.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I
always feel like I'm dumping it all in the middle and then just trying to spread it out at the end.
Right.
Could you use a round pie pan for this recipe?
For sure, yeah. I don't see any reason why you wouldn't be able to do that. For that, I would probably do a deep dish or reduce this recipe, because a 9-inch pie dish is going to be the same, well, almost the same size as this, but without the corners. So you're losing a lot of area for that. So I would use a bigger pie dish.
Absolutely.
If you can, or like I said, reduce the recipe a little bit.
Yeah. I was thinking maybe a cast iron pan would be kind of cool.
Yeah, that would be great.
So I know we're going to be adding, you could always add a little bit of topping to this as well to make it a little sweeter with perhaps like, I believe we're using a light whipped cream today if you wanted to do something like that. You could buy a healthier ice cream like Halo Top, I think is a little bit healthier, or like a low-fat vanilla ice cream would go great. I think I would really love this with some vanilla yogurt. I think that would be awesome.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. Right, so that's everything for this. You can tell it's pretty close to the top. I think you could see that from this side a little bit better, that it's really up there. So when I bake this, I'm going to put it on top of another cookie sheet. Excuse my cookie sheet, it's really old. It's well loved. So I'm just going to set that on top so that if any of the filling bubbles over, it's not going to end up on the bottom of my oven, because that's a beast to clean. So I will just throw this in.
That is a really good tip.
All right, and so through the magic of TV, this is what it's going to look like when it's all done. You can tell the topping is nice and browned. It crisped up really nicely, and the apples are soft. So when before I took this out of the oven, I tested the apples just with a little knife put in, just to make sure that they were soft before I took it out of the oven. And you might notice that this is not an 8x8 pan. The reasons for that being I only have one 8x8 pan, and also I am just one person. So I cut the recipe in half to do this batch, and that way I'm not gonna end up wasting food by having way too much. And half a batch fit in this loaf pan pretty perfectly. So that's always an option too if you don't want to end up with all of that at the end.
Especially a lot of sweets. Maybe you could share.
Yeah, exactly.
So, just one last comment from one of our viewers. I'm assuming if you use a juicier fruit like berries, you would want to need to add a bit more of the topping to thicken it up. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you could either add a little bit more of the topping. Otherwise, you can toss some of the berries with a little bit of cornstarch, and that is going to act as a thickener too. That's kind of makes a little bit of a gel. So I would do, for this amount, maybe a tablespoon of cornstarch mixed in and just toss with the berries before you do anything else with them.
Perfect. Thank you so much for all those tips, Julia. We're so grateful you're helping us out with Cooking Connected. All right. So thank you again, Julia, for that demonstration. And that was our healthy apple crisp. Again, thank you, Monique from Ambitious Kitchen.
Yes, ladies, that looks so good. Oh my goodness, I wish I could have some. Yes, thank you, Julia, so much for prepping that recipe for us. Before you guys go, we do want to quickly just do a recap of our survey for today. Again, that link is posted in the live chat. I will post it again. It is also in the description box of the video, so please check that out and take a couple minutes to just do that survey for us. Our survey code is E097930. And again, that's going to be our survey code to do this week's survey for Cooking Connected, the healthy apple crisp. And that looks so good. I'm just, wow. So anyway, thank you guys so much for joining us again, and we will see you next week. Feel free to comment below, message us on Facebook with any recipes that you'd like to see us do. We'd be happy to take those suggestions. So thanks again, everyone. Bye-bye.